Welcome to the 16th in a series of shows addressing Brookline as an age-friendly community. In 2012, the World Health Organization of the United Nations designated Brookline as its first age-friendly city in New England. That was the result of the work of the Brookline town residents, the select board, the town administrator, and a set of volunteer organizations that provided leadership. In 2016, the Select Board filed a complete streets policy with the Massachusetts state. And that complete streets policy is basically implemented by two groups, the Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Bicycle Advisory Committee. The complete street policy provided a new vision for design based on facilities for walking and cycling, as opposed to just focusing on cars. Today's guests are people from those committees. We have John Bowman from the Bicycle Advisory Committee and David Trevett from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. John is the chairman of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and he lives in Brookline, has lived in Brookline since 1992, and he lives on Beale Street all that time. John has a PhD in transportation, which is extremely appropriate, from MIT in 1998. And he was on the committee that drafted that complete streets policy. Welcome, John.
Thanks.
And then David is here. David Trevett is on the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And he's a member of that committee since it was formed, which is last year. This is a brand new committee concentrating on pedestrians. David has been a resident of Brookline since 2011. And he lives on Babcock Street since 2015. David has an undergrad from MIT and a PhD in physics from the University of Maryland, College Park. David's career was recently 28 years at the University of Chicago in the Information Systems Department. He retired from there as a senior director for administration systems. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start off by just having them describe the committees themselves, since we need to understand this being a town in New England and having volunteers run most of the town, these committees become very important. Would one of you like to start? The Bicycle Advisory Committee?
Sure. The Bicycle Advisory Committee is a committee of volunteers, 7 of us, and we're appointed by the Transportation Board. And in addition to those 7 voting members, there's a liaison, Jonathan Kapust, to the Transportation Board, and also Sergeant Brian Sutherland, representing the police department.
Oh yes, I think I met him actually. He's interesting. Yes.
Our mission is to encourage cycling in town, and especially, as the name implies, to advise the Transportation Board on matters related to cycling in town.
David. The Bicycle Committee.
The Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
The Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
The Pedestrian Advisory Committee, as you mentioned, is new. We had our first meeting last May of 2017, so we're less than a year old. So a lot of what we're doing right now is learning. There's an astonishing amount of documentation out there that we're finding out exists. There's a Massachusetts Department of Transportation guideline for walkability. There are Brookline guidelines for how to design intersections. There are crosswalk standards. There are all sorts of things. There are 6 of us on the committee. We're appointed by the Transportation Board, and our job is to help the Transportation Board have input from the perspective of pedestrians as they tackle all the different kinds of transportation issues that arise in Brookline. One interesting thing that we discovered just recently is that not everything that you would think falls under the Transportation Board does. So, for example, we observed a lot of congestion around the Trader Joe's parking lot. Well, parking lots actually fall under the Planning Board. So if we detect something, we can advise the Transportation Board that maybe there's an issue. They can then contact the Zoning Board, the Planning Board about these issues. But we're still learning how the town operates.
So if someone contacts you about something such as Trader Joe's, would you refer them to someplace else, or should they now up front know that they have another place to go?
It really depends on what the issue is. If it's something that affects pedestrians,
Right.
we would probably look at the issue and then we would advise the Transportation Board and have some recommendation.
Well, in this case, it's not the Transportation Board.
We do not, as a committee, write directly to any other board in the town. Our advice goes to the Transportation Board. We can ask or recommend that the Transportation Board contact other boards and request that they take some action or look into something.
Got it. Is that the same thing with the bicycle advisory?
Yes, that's true. Our mission in life is to work with the Transportation Board, essentially. We don't directly advise or take actions apart from advising the Transportation Board, generally.
So,
I also wanted to mention that like with the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, sometimes people will contact us with questions or issues, and we welcome that. The Bicycle Advisory Committee has a website where it's brooklinebikes.org
great.
that people can look at and can submit a question to us, and we're pretty faithful in responding to those questions. And sometimes we take them up ourselves. Sometimes we refer it to the Transportation Board or to someone else.
Okay, before we go further, I'd like one of you to explain to me the Transportation Board's position in town, because we keep mentioning them and you only advise to them. Would one of you like to pick that up and just give me a background on that?
Well, the Transportation Board, its job is to set policy and deal with issues and recommend regulations and make decisions about the design of reconstructed streets, pretty much almost anything related to transportation. It's then they are staffed they provide the support by the Transportation Division with the town management, and projects are carried out by the Engineering Division. So their job is policy decision making. Would you want to comment about that?
I would just add that the Transportation Board came into existence in the 1970s, I believe it is, through Massachusetts legislation, enabling legislation that defines in a very brief bill or whatever legislation the nature and the role and the responsibilities of the Transportation Board. It really has quite a bit of power in town. The members of the Transportation Board are appointed by the Select Board. And while the Transportation Board is responsible for policy decisions related to transportation, there is the possibility, when people disagree, to appeal that decision to the board, to the Select Board.
Got it.
That
Pretty
does,
much they're on their own otherwise, and then it's an appeal question.
That does happen from time to time, but I think the desire by the Transportation Board and the Select Board is for business to be taken care of by the Transportation Board so that as little as possible goes to the Select Board.
And if you look at the agendas, you'll find things like requests from residents to add a handicap space here, or allow for more parking there, or put in a better crosswalk here, or add a sign there. Those kinds of things that help regulate and facilitate all modes of transportation.
Yeah, and they clearly have the power to do that, so that's really good. I mean, they have the power to execute, and they're much less responsive to the Select Board. They're able to move and make those decisions themselves, except with appeal.
Right.
Yes.
So that's very good. Thank you very much. Now, let's get on with you guys. One of the things that really intrigued me was I heard something about a green routes. Now, I think that makes me think of parks, etc., the Emerald, Network, etc. What is the Green Routes Plan? What is that?
It's the longer name for that is the Green Routes Bicycle Network Plan. It is something that was born through the work of the Bicycle Advisory Committee about 10 years ago. It's a document that the Bicycle Advisory Committee updates every year and submits to the Transportation Board for its review and not formal approval, but the Transportation Board stays in tune with that. And it lays out a pretty detailed vision for a connected network of bicycle facilities through town that the town chips away at implementing over time. And one of the ways that it's used practically is that the transportation staff, Todd Corain, the transportation administrator, when there are street repaving projects, looks at the Green Routes Plan to see what is recommended by the bicycle community and then tries to incorporate that into the projects when they're being repaved.
Oh, excellent. So that's, you really get the input right there.
Right.
Is there something like that for pedestrians, or will there be someday?
Well, not at this point. Certainly one of our hopes is, I mean, we are just starting to, do studies and take a look at the condition and facilities of streets and pedestrian capabilities within Brookline. And we hope that what will emerge out of that is some guidelines that we can provide to the town, to the Transportation Board, for things that should be considered. Now, a lot of that has already been identified. I mentioned all these other documents that exist.
Right.
But there are things that we want to be able to bring to the Transportation Board and the town's attention. And so we hope that there will be something. It's probably not a network like the Green Routes Plan, but guidelines.
It's called a map, right? Town, including the pathways. So that's bicycles very different.
Design considerations.
Right. But I can see certainly wanting to know where there are parks, where there are benches. I'm interested in that. What is an area that's likely to have easy path from one place to another? Because there are paths, but some of them are easier and some of them are harder. So I would like something like that. So if you guys can produce that, 10 years it took? If you can do it in half that, we can get it in 5 years. I'll be really happy. Okay. And what else is going on? And you have projects going? You have things going related to?
Well, we've just really started our first systematic study. Actually, our second meeting, based on what some sort of sister organizations in other towns have done, we decided to actually do a meeting where we just walked along a street in Brookline and made observations. And that was actually a lot of learning. Jonathan Kapust is our liaison from the Transportation Board. He's an engineer himself, and he helped us think about what things to look for. So it's a great educational experience. And now we're actually we have permission, authorization from the Transportation Board to do a study of Longwood Avenue. From Harvard Street all the way to the town line at the Muddy River.
I've been there.
That is a heavily used corridor between Brookline and the Longwood Medical area. It's pedestrians, it's bikes, it's cars, and there's a school crossing midway down that. So we're trying to both look at static conditions, just the shape of the street and what it's like and what it facilitates and what it doesn't facilitate, plus look at it during particular periods. For example, what does the sort of morning rush of people heading into the Longwood Medical area look like? What problems emerge when there's lots of people and bikes and cars? What happens when it's right before school start time and a lot of kids need to cross the street? So these kinds of things. And the idea is that we're doing data gathering now. We will study that data, find ways to consolidate and extract themes from it, and then pass on recommendations to the Transportation Board.
That's great. I drive through there. What about the bikes in that area? Do you run into anything similar situation?
In that area, it's really it's a difficult and challenging place for bicyclists. It's mostly, but not entirely, downhill from Harvard Street to the medical area. And there is a bicycle lane going in that direction, mostly downhill.
Right.
But in the mostly uphill direction, there's no lane. There are sharrows, and those sharrows are intended to tell bicyclists and car drivers that bicyclists can ride in the middle of the lane. But I've had people who use that regularly for their commute to and from the medical area say that it's very challenging, especially in that direction, because they're biking slower,
Right.
uphill, and
Cars, right? The cars were impatient.
that's right.
Right? The cars are impatient.
That's
and they
right.
sit there. Sometimes they'll
Right.
try to pass a bicycle that's not far on the far right, and it could be really dangerous. And if they stay too close to the cars, they can get hit by a door.
That's right.
You know.
I mentioned the term Sharrows, and I didn't really say what that is.
Yeah.
It's a symbol that has a bicycle, and I think they're called chevrons, arrows, like
Right. Chevrons. Yeah.
and they just right on the pavement in the.
And what does that mean? What? I'm a driver. I see that and I say, so what does that mean? Is this a very wide bike path, or is this? I think of it as a bike. I'm from Brooklyn, New York originally, and we had bike paths all the way up and down the streets, and that's what registers on me. So pardon me.
Well,
But
it's
is
not
that
it's
is
not
that
a
bike
separate
thing?
it's not a separate bike path, but what it basically gives is a message that since there isn't a separate bike path, bikes belong in the traffic lane.
Right.
It tells bicycles that, and it tells cars that. But I should say, in recent years, Sharrows have fallen out of favor at the national and at the state level, and I think they're falling out of favor in Brookline as well. But it's very difficult to get rid of them completely because the streets are narrow.
Yeah. I mean, the principle of sharing is certainly true, but to actually deliberately look to turn a road into a share road instead of figuring out how to engineer it properly concerns me only because of the difficulty of doing it, I think. It seems to me.
It concerns bicyclists too, and there have been studies that have shown that probably over 50% of people are in the group called interested but concerned. They're people who would like to ride their bicycles but don't because they don't feel it's safe enough for them to ride their bicycles. And Sharrows don't meet the standard that most interested but concerned folks would hold for feeling safe to ride on the road.
Okay. Yeah, I actually talked to someone like that in preparation for this program. I interviewed someone and asked why he stopped riding a bike, and he said it was safety.
Yeah.
I also talked to a lot of other people who don't ride bikes, and it's because hills and cars are faster and other things. But there is definitely, I think I had firsthand experience talking to someone, interviewing somebody who described exactly what you just said.
I ask people from time to time who don't ride bikes why, and that's in town, and that's almost always the reason in
Right,
town.
but it usually is, as I think, it's people you would expect to be riding a bike.
Yeah.
And you'd say, why not? And that was exactly what I found.
Yeah.
I asked this person who I would have certainly expected to be riding a bike, and he explained exactly what you said. It's interesting. So, are there any other projects from the pedestrian committee, or?
Well, not specific projects. We are looking forward to cooperation with the other advisory committees. So, for example, we had a joint meeting with the Bicycle Advisory Committee where we heard this presentation from Livable Streets organization on this whole notion of greenways throughout the metropolitan Boston area. We have not yet met with there's also a third advisory committee that we haven't mentioned yet, the Public Transit Advisory Committee. And we do expect to eventually work together with
They
them
carry
as well.
pedestrians, right?
The fact of the matter is that once you get off the T, you're a pedestrian. Once you get off your bike,
Actually,
you're a
I was just going to say
pedestrian.
the bikes carry
We're-
pedestrians.
We're all pedestrians in one
Right,
way
but
or
especially
another.
the public transportation, they're clearly pedestrians. They're,
Public transportation also carries cyclists.
Yeah,
They do.
right. Yeah.
Speaking of cyclists and projects, I know a project that you guys have worked on because I drive on it constantly. I drive on Marion, right near Marion, on Beacon Street, constantly. It's a regular path for me by car, and it's changed over
Yeah.
the last couple of
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, that was a fairly significant change in town, I would say. It's on the outbound portion of Beacon Street from basically between Coolidge Corner and Washington Square. Not the whole length there, but most of the length between Coolidge Corner and Washington Square. There's the outbound Beacon Street goes uphill there significantly.
Right.
And bicyclists perceived that as the most dangerous stretch of Beacon Street, because bikes are going uphill slowly there, and cars are pulling out from the traffic light and in a hurry to get to Washington Square, and it felt really unsafe. And the Bicycle Advisory Committee was involved in the process that led to a buffered bike lane on Beacon Street. What took place is that one of the driving lanes was replaced by a bicycle lane with a buffer of about 3 feet between the bike lane and the parking lane,
Right.
and on the other side, another 3 feet or so between the bike lane and the moving traffic lane. And that there was concern about how it would affect car traffic, so it was done as a 1-year trial project, and there was intensive study done by the Transportation Division to check queues and traffic speeds and volumes, and the conclusion at the end of the 1-year study was to continue it permanently. So I believe this summer the permanent markings, the thermoplastic markings, are going to be made there, and bicyclists are thrilled.
Oh, and that's a state road though. Don't they need permission for that, or?
They did, and that was part of the reason that there was such an intensive study. It had to be justified by the town to the State Department of
Great.
Transportation.
Great.
That's
Oh,
right.
that's good work.
Yeah.
That's good work. I think as the drivers have as much trouble around the Marion area as anybody. The drivers, the bicyclists, the walkers for that matter, but certainly the drivers, because they have to cross in order to turn, and when they come, they go all different directions. But that certainly from Marion, I know from Marion on to Westbourne, I guess it is, Westbourne Terrace.
I forget exactly
yeah,
where
I don't
it
know the
stops.
area, but it's,
It has to stop before Washington Square
yeah,
in
it's
order to
Westbourne, a block
provide
before, just
in order to provide multiple queue lanes for cars stopping at the red light in Washington Square.
and a right turn lane and things
Yeah,
like that. It's right
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, but it works very well. It makes it hard to park because they're narrow parking lanes, but it works. It absolutely works because I park in the area a lot, and it works. I mean, you can see the bikes, and they look more comfortable. From what I can tell, they seem to be riding with a little more confidence than in that area in the past before they put
Oh
it
yeah,
in.
yeah.
Well
and
done,
in fact,
well done.
and it's not just bicyclists that use that lane. We had a picture. I don't know if it's been shown up here or not.
Yeah, it will be.
But I was checking it out early in the trial period, and up rolled a person with a mobility impairment in an electric wheelchair, choosing to use the buffered bike lane rather than the bumpy sidewalk
Yeah, that's very
on
good.
that stretch.
Yeah, that is a bumpy. It's big, but it's yeah, it is pretty bumpy.
It is
Right.
pretty bumpy.
Right.
Yeah, we have one or two other projects. Do you want to hear about those?
Yes, I do.
Well, we have more than one or two, but I'm prepared to talk about one or two.
Yeah, we're
One is on Center Street, which it hasn't been implemented, but a buffered bike lane is going to be implemented this summer on Center Street. It runs behind the Coolidge Corner Theater
Right.
and the arcade building.
right.
They're making an alternate path for folks who don't want to brave Harvard Street
Oh, that's good.
there. And one that's not a pavement type of a project is a study that the Bicycle Advisory Committee did last year. It was, we studied what we called bike lane violations.
Oh, I see.
And we had 16 volunteers who on their commutes kept track of, for the various segments of their commute route, whether there was a bike lane violation on that route or not. You're looking with a perplexed look. What's a bike lane
Right.
violation?
Thank you.
A bike lane violation is when a motor vehicle stops or parks and obstructs the bike lane so that a bicyclist coming up has to move out of the lane into traffic
Oh, yeah.
in order to get
Oh,
around the
yeah.
vehicle. And
Right.
it hasn't to my knowledge, actually caused any accidents in Brookline to date. But it's perceived as dangerous, that type of weaving maneuver. And the big takeaway from that is that on two of our most heavily traveled streets, Beacon Street and Harvard Street, the street segments were obstructed by bike lane violations 27% of the time.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah, that's, I mean, basically means they lose the bike lane for that time.
that's right. Yeah. And so we concluded that unprotected bike lanes are inadequate for these busy streets, and presented that to the Transportation Board, and are now working with the Transportation Board, the transportation staff, the police, and the merchants, or we're planning to work with the merchants. That's just getting started up to address the problem. And two examples of possibilities. There's going to be a demonstration protected bike lane just for a short stretch of Beacon Street inbound from Washington Square.
Great.
Just so that it can be a demonstration to see how it works. And another one is...
Well, I think I want to get into the pedestrian examples.
Okay,
Because
fine.
they have a similar situation, I think. And you don't have a violation, but what do you have as obstacles? For
Well, we have actually one of the things. I mean, one, obviously, we're concerned about pedestrian safety.
Right.
And we have to remember that the senior population in Brookline is growing rapidly. It's increasing. That means more people using canes, wheelchairs, more people who are vision or sight impaired. We have to make streets safe for them. At the same time, we have families coming in with young children.
Absolutely.
And so we have to be aware of the safety for them. One of the major safety issues, of course, is speed of vehicles. So we're very happy about Brookline moving the general speed limit down to 25 miles
helps
an hour.
everybody, I think.
There are some cases where it probably should be even lower than that. The most dangerous things for either pedestrians or bikes is motor vehicles.
Right.
One of the interesting things is that, according to Massachusetts Department of Transportation statistics, 70% of pedestrian fatalities occur mid-block. You think about it, and of course it makes sense. Somebody trying to cross the street mid-block doesn't see a car coming, gets hit.
Right.
Why are they crossing mid-block? Sometimes because it's a long distance to the crosswalk.
Absolutely.
So both the
They can't-
existence
it's a-
of crosswalks, we want more crosswalks, and then when those crosswalks are there, we want them to be accessible.
Right.
So we have one picture of a crosswalk at on Harvard Street across from the Stop and Shop, where I was walking back from an evening meeting in Town Hall,
Right.
and I wanted, in fact, I was walking on
We have it on the picture.
Yes, yeah, there it is. I was walking along the west side of the street. I wanted to cross over to go to the Stop and Shop. Well, there's a crosswalk there. There's even a pedestrian walk sign, and you can't really see it in this picture. That walk sign is on. It's saying walk, but you can't get to the crosswalk because there's a wall of snow.
Snow in the middle.
So one of the things we're trying to do is work with DPW, Department of Public Works, to ensure that crosswalks are accessible.
Right.
Even when there isn't snow around, there are barriers affecting other streets. So for example, there's one walk I use all the time around Green Street, where there's a hedge that is encroaching on the sidewalk. At the same time, there's a large pole. We have a picture of that too. If you look at the picture, you'll see that there's a pedestrian walking in the street. So the pedestrian has been
Just
because
forced into the street.
two people cannot pass right at that point. I
Absolutely.
was walking one way, the other
I
person
walk
was
there all
the
the
other
time.
way, and walked out into the street.
Right.
So these kinds of things, and there are many other cases that we've noticed around Brookline where owners of buildings are simply not keeping their hedges trimmed enough to allow the proper sidewalk width.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of issues we want to bring up. There's also a question of sidewalk maintenance. We have sidewalks that are heaved by the roots of trees. We have cases where the tree
Yes,
wells...
we in fact had a whole show talking about that, which you're not aware.
Oh,
but,
okay.
For age friendly,
Okay.
talking about the fact of the roots that are up,
Yeah.
and the snow and ice on the sidewalks, bicycles that go in, we're riding on sidewalks instead of obeying the
Yeah.
don't the signs that say no bicycles riding on the.
I think we have a picture here of one of the tree wells, and this does not meet guidelines because there's too much of a level difference between the sidewalk itself and the surface of the tree well, that area around the tree. So if you were trying, you had a couple people passing right there,
I've seen it.
and you step on that edge, you're going to turn your ankle. Now, particularly for people who are older or more frail, that could lead to a fall.
They're going to cut us off. We need another program, without any doubt, just to pick up. I think we could do another full program on just where you guys are and what's been happening, because this is something to keep everybody informed in. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you two guys here. We're on the shows on Channel 3, and we're also on the website and on the social media. So thanks again.